In today's topic, what can we do to change policing in our communities?
Let me start by just acknowledging that uh, we have seen in the last several weeks, last few months, uh, the kinds of epic changes and events in our country that are as profound as anything that I've seen in my lifetime. Although all of us have been feeling pain, uncertainty, disruption, uh, some folks have been feeling it more than others. Most of all, the pain that's been experienced by the families of George and Brianna and Ahmad and Tony and Sean and too many others to mention. And to those families who've been directly affected by tragedy, please know that Michelle and I and the nation grieve with you, hold you in our prayers. We're committed to the fight of creating a more just nation in memory of your sons and daughters.
Today's workshop, the goal is to take us further in the journey from where we started last week. And we've gathered a group of highly acclaimed activists, organizers, and change makers to really help you explore the wide spectrum of policing and public safety options, alternative public safety models, and community-centered review processes. Patrice, you have come to the work of police reform from a very personal place. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your personal experience have shaped your opinion on what public safety looks like in the United States of America.
I grew up in Van Nuys, California, small working class suburb outside of the inner city. My earliest memories of police were not fond. In fact, my earliest memories were police raiding our home, stop and frisking my siblings and their friends. And if I take a moment to think about it, I'm often shocked and alarmed because we were children. And the part of this conversation that is often lost upon us is the impact over-policing and over-incarceration has on children. So I start with that because in some ways, much of the work that I do has everything to do with wanting to save my family's life. How do I protect them? How do we get our basic necessities? We have an opportunity right now in this country to reevaluate the ways in which Black communities and poor communities have been engaged with for the last 50 years, 100 years, 400 years. We have an opportunity to really ask ourselves serious questions about the police's role in Black communities in particular. We know that the long-term vision that we're building right now is a vision that's going to keep us all safe. And I think that's what matters most.
Hello and welcome to the Clarion Call Show. I'm Janice Hatcher-Liggins, your host. So what has led to our divided views on policing? What are the contributors and challenges? Joining us today to provide subject matter expertise in this often difficult discussion are Mr. Ronald Hampton. Mr. Hampton served 23 years as D.C. police officer. Community relations was his specialty. Mr. Hampton is former executive director for the National Black Police Association, and he's board member for the Institute of the Black World. We also have Mr. Walter Ridley, president and CEO of the Ridley Group and Associates, a consulting firm providing expertise in criminal justice services and church administration. Walter Ridley is a former warden. He was corrections director at both adult and juvenile facilities. He also served as chair of the parole board. Welcome, welcome to the show. I appreciate you both being here. We've already introduced you a little bit, but I want you each to talk about yourself. We know that you've had 23 years of policing with community service as your community relations as your specialty, and we also know that you're a warden and an advisor on criminal justice. But talk about some of the things you've also done, just briefly.
Well, I served in on the police department in the capacity as a community relations officer, but I sort of use community relations as a metaphor for the way I conducted my work every single day. I lived on my footbeat. I lived in Adams Morgan. I actually lived on my footbeat. I had 16th Street to 18th Street, Calorama to Harvard Street.
But now that's a very interesting point, because so many people say, well, the police don't want to live where they have to work because they don't want to be associated with it. They want to get away from it. But you lived right on the same beat that you patrolled?
Not only that, but as a policy, as a practice, personally and organizationally at that time, we supported residency. In other words, police officers living in the city, with the people where they police, so that they would have a vested interest in the process of public safety, not just policing, but public safety, the whole idea of how we conduct public safety work. So I enjoyed living in the city. I lived on Columbia Road, I worked on Columbia Road, and the people in the apartment building knew that I was a police officer. I didn't try to hide that. I didn't have any problems. So I really enjoyed being a police officer in the city. What I didn't enjoy necessarily was the sort of the racism, the discrimination that existed in the institution itself that attempted to sort of in some way prevent me from being the kind of police officer that I knew I wanted to be, that was rooted in that community and knowing the kind of public safety policies that I wanted to be involved with.
Ronald E. Hampton retired from the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department after 23 years of service as a community relations officer. He is reputed for his outstanding work with citizens of the 3rd Police District in Washington, D.C., in crime prevention and community participation and relations. His extensive experience and knowledge in community relations and policing has resulted in education and training opportunities for Mr. Hampton locally, nationally, and internationally. Mr. Hampton is the immediate past Executive Director of the National Black Police Association, Inc., and presently the Washington, D.C. Representative for Blacks in Law Enforcement of America. Additionally, he serves as a Law Enforcement Fellow at the University of the District of Columbia's Institute for Public Safety and Justice. With his reputation and expertise in community policing as well as human rights, Mr. Hampton has served as a consultant educator to the Carter Center of Emory University Human Rights Program. His works with the Carter Center has led to working in countries like Ethiopia and Guyana. He has also provided consultation services for organizations in Britain, Canada, South Africa, and the Bahamas. In 1996, Mr. Hampton led a people-to-people citizens ambassador program law enforcement delegation of 26 to South Africa. Mr. Hampton has served as a member of the Board of Directors of the Federal Board of the Drug Policy Foundation's Law Enforcement Committee, American Civil Liberties Union, NCA, Amnesty International USA, Institute of the Black World 21st Century, and the advisory committees, Capital Punishment Project, and the National Police Accountability Project.
Okay, Ron, you with us? Ron, are you there?
I'm with you. Yeah, I just had to get on my laptop. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, good morning. And I need to see your handsome face too.
I know I'm good. I'm ready to do that right now.
Okay, all right. Good morning, Justice B family and our family on Real STL News. Thank you again so much for joining us this Saturday for our discussion on what we as a community can do to reconstruct policing in our communities. And this morning, as you see, we have a guest speaker, Mr. Ronald Hampton, who is a retired 23-year police officer out of DC. And he's going to talk to us about how we can get involved. First, we're going to start segment one by discussing what are some of the issues that we're facing in the communities and how we can potentially come together as a community to impact at the local level. Mr. Ronald Hampton, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm still waiting for you to show up on the screen. Are you there? I think he might be having a little technical difficulties here. So in the meantime, what I would like our listening audience to do is, because we're going to have a Q&A at 10:45, if you have some burning questions that you definitely know you're going to want to ask Mr. Hampton, start putting those in the chat so we can start curating those and asking them at that 10:45 mark. Anything that has to do with policing in your communities, if you have suggestions, comments, recommendations about what you would like to see in the reshaping and restructuring of policing, we want to hear all of it. And this will not be the last conversation. It is time that we stop complaining about policing in our community and stop looking to others external to the community to fix what's going on in the community. If you want the police to respond to your community differently, you have to stand up and demand a seat at the table. And we're going to talk about ways to develop some collaborative partnerships with the police department and what that will look like. And the citizens, regular folk in their community taking a lead and having the department respond to us as a community versus we sitting back thinking that they're going to do everything. It's time out for that. Mr. Hampton, you have joined us. I see your handsome face. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? This time difference has been confusing to me because I was planning on being here at 12 rather than 11.
You know, you and I talked last night and we went over this and I said, you know what? That's what the issue is. It's the time difference. But it's all good. It's all good, my friend. You here. You're here. Okay.
Well, I'm glad to be here and glad to see you too, my sister.
Yeah, it's been a minute since we worked together and been up there in the DC area, but I'm so happy to have you and been following your continued efforts. You've been consistent in this activism and advocacy in this, and I'm glad to see that you're still in the struggle. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Things haven't changed enough for me to retire. Really.
I see. So I'm glad you're still on the team.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, you know, I was just giving some, we did an intro, of course, leading in with some thoughts from Obama's foundation and a video of him talking about the issue nationally. And then there was a video that followed with a lady giving her personal testimony about the impact of policing in the community on her family. And then, of course, we did a short snippet from your interview with the Clarion Call a couple of years ago, where you were talking about police brutality and reform and your experience being on a footbeat and living in the community.
Right.
So we're going to get started because this is not going to be the first time that we talk. We're going to do this some more because we got to bring our people into a place where they take charge.
That's right.
It's time out for us complaining and whining about what the police are doing, and we start making them respond to the community. This is what we want. So talk to me about let's talk about first what you're seeing now and your perspective about policing, and then we'll move into discussions about what we can do to reshape that and reconstruct it.
Okay. Well, let me start by saying this, that I was a police officer from 1970 to 1994. And on the end of my career, I was also, I had gotten involved in the National Black Police Association back around 74, 75. And we had a local Black Police Association in Washington, DC, which led me to the national level and the leadership of the national level. As a matter of fact, you're in a city where the leadership of local Black police organizations came together in 1972 to then birth the National Black Police Association, which consisted of about initially about 25, 30 organizations, eventually moving up to representing over 30,000 Black police officers in this country during that particular time. And those were strange times because not only were Black police officers felt the pressure of racism and discrimination in police departments, but the policies and practices of police departments were discriminatory and racist as it related to the communities that they served, which they didn't serve, really, not in the way that they served the white communities and the well-to-do communities. So that wasn't a wake-up to me because I was seeing it firsthand, but it said to me that there were others who were suffering under this this heavy hand of racism and discrimination and white supremacy. And we needed to address this thing holistically, universally, rather than just locally here in Washington, D.C. And we were able to meet and organize brothers and sisters in Canada, the UK, other parts of Europe, as well as the Caribbean, and even in South Africa, doing before and after apartheid. So this was my entree into all of this stuff, but I was experiencing it every single day. And what it said to me is that we really needed to work on this and not, well, we were talking about reform at that time, but really and truthfully, that didn't last too long because people wasn't serious about reform. And when I say people, I mean the police community wasn't serious because they thought what they was doing was what they was doing and they didn't need no reform. They thought the reform conversation that was coming from the community and those like me inside the institution, they discounted that as disgruntledness rather than a true observation of our day experiences, not only in the system, but from the community standpoint. But that evolved, that evolved. So we've had some changes. We've even seen the system attempt to change itself through the what I call the paradigm of community policing, which I thought was interesting because it called for this partnership between the police and the community to address public safety. And if there ever was a time for the community to step up, it was during that time. And you didn't have to know an awful lot. All you had to want to do was have an interest in working in your community to make your community the safest place that it could be. But as it evolved, it also educated the community people about what policing was about, as well as the structure of policing and how policing should be versus how it was at that time. And so for me, that was important because as we looked across the country and even internationally at what community-based groups were doing, they were doing more about public safety than the police were. And they were doing it in the kind of way that really resulted results because it was locally in their neighborhoods and communities and the kind of things that was going on. And plus it was effective because when they studied the results of it after they had been around for some years, then they saw the effectiveness of the community-based crime prevention efforts versus what the police was doing. The police was running around like a dog chasing their tail when the community groups was really doing good work about what's happening. And why shouldn't it? Because they knew and was very familiar with the problem. That's what I think we ought to do. That's where the notion comes from about community control of the police. Something in the later years, Black Lives Matter folk in their campaign, they have this campaign and they had this 10 points. And one of the 10 points is community control of the police. Well, I believe in that too. And I want to take it even further. I want to make that part of the structure of policing as it relates to how they operate in our community, because community control of the police mean just that we're in control of it. It's like the local school board. It's like the local politicians. And so we get to work with them around how to set the agenda for what public safety looks like in my community. But the caveat to all of that, Elaine, is that the community has a role in that process. And not a laid back, police do all of the work. I'm not going to do anything because I pay I pay for you to do public service. That is not the role in the community control of the police paradigm. It is a real partnership, and it may even be more than that for the simple reason is that we live in these communities, like the community I live in, I've been living in here since 1981. And if I don't know what's going on, then don't nobody else know what's going on. And I know because I live here and I participate in the process, plus I'm out there in the community and in the street. People need to have that kind of information and control over what's going on. But it even goes further in terms of the institution. And that is we not only will hire and fire the chief of police, we interact with the politicians and the policy makers. We also begin to set the agenda for what public safety looks like and manifests itself in our community. We're also involved in the oversight and discipline of police officers as it relates to their behavior. We're also involved in the design of how the police department will handle the selection of police officers and all of that. So it's a thorough and universal approach to policing because it belongs to us. It don't belong to the police officers who work on police. It don't belong to the chief of police. He's there to manage the resources and provide leadership, but it's not his police department. It's our police department. And this community control component, I think, is what is happening. And lastly, let me say this. The question should be from anybody who's listening or heard this conversation before, does that example exist somewhere? And I want to tell you it does. In Canada, in Toronto for one, people can look it up. The Toronto Police Services Board is a civilian body led by civilians, have a budget and oversight of the Toronto Police Department. In the UK, there's the same structure. United Kingdom, in England, there's the same structure. In New Zealand and Australia, there's the same structure. It's only in America where the police don't think that the community is sophisticated enough to understand and have oversight over the police department. And so it does exist in other places. Now in those other places, there are different components of it, but the fact of the matter is that community control of the police in its essence exists. And that's what we need to have here, because for too long, the police been in control of all of this stuff, and it really hasn't done what that quote that's on the side of their car, the serve and protect, that hasn't happened.
Right.
It's really not what's happening.
Right.
It's going to happen though.
Okay, so how do you think, what would you say to community members to get them to really embrace this concept of community policing and the fact that it can be done? How do we motivate? And because our mission on this show is not just to be talking, it is to equip, educate, and empower folks with information so they can take it and move with it. Move with it. The resources that we're giving you, the examples of model programs. What would you say? Because I sense apathy in the communities.
Well, there's apathy, and then plus there's the environment that's been around for some time that the police created themselves, and that atmosphere is that we get paid to be police officers, so all we want you to do is call us, and then when we get there, we're going to take care of it. Well, what has happened is that we've called them. No, they have told us they would take care of it. We've called them, and when they got there, they didn't do anything. So, and that has created the apathy, because if you're in an environment where you've been told to call a person or an institution or agency to take care of the problem, and they never take care of the problem, then what you get, what happens to you then is you say, well, why should I call you? Because you ain't gonna do nothing. And so you just back up and don't get involved in it all. So it's the way it changed. To have people on the ground who are interested in implementing and organizing this concept in the community, because we're going to have to bring people back to the point. And the way you bring them back to the point is educating and talking about how to empower them to do what it is that they should have been doing all along. And you do that in a very careful, considerate kind of way, because you don't want to alienate people, but you empower them in the kind of way so that they can take control of what it is that's going on. Just like I was talking about, it's just like serving as a member on the local elected school board. a locally elected school board. That gives the community power to be involved in the policy and practices of what education looks like in their community. Well, this community control concept is about the same thing. It's about giving community control of the process, policy making, and control over the matters of what's going on in their police department, not the police department's police department, but in their police department. And you have to constantly educate and talk with people about that process to get them to the place where they can understand and know what that is. And then two, talk about the police function. See, the police have been expert at mystifying. Back in the days when I used to watch Amos and Andy, they used to talk about the mystic knights of the sea. And look, they've been expert at mystifying the role of the police in our society, so the public stands back on the outside shaking their head. Well, I can't get involved because I don't know anything about it. That's not true.
So we're going to demystify.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All we had to do is do that. And look, not only that, you know, there was when you was here, there was a clothing store. There was a clothing store around here that called Sims Clothing Store. And the motto of the store was, an educated consumer is the best consumer. And that's what we want when it comes to public safety. We want to educate them, talk to them about what it is that they can do, demystify the system, and then talk to people about the power that they have. There are communities in this country, and I know you know this, there are communities in this country, white, let me be real clear. There are white communities in this country and some religious community like the Jewish community in New York City, where the police contact the community leaders before they even go into the community. They just can't go into the community and do any and everything they want to do without contacting the leaders of that community. That does not take place in the Black community. And I don't care how much money the Black community has or how prosperous that Black community may be, but the police don't pay no attention to that because they deal with the word, they deal with the complexion of the community rather than the resources or the reputation of the community. And that's what we need to be working on that. And it's only done when the community realizes that it has the power to control as well as implement and design the practices that the police department is going to be employing in that community. And it can done. There are awesome examples going on in this country and have been for some time where those kind of communities exist. And it has been on the shoulders and efforts of individuals who have taken on the responsibility of educating and empowering that community to take control over the public safety. And see, I don't necessarily use the term law enforcement or police, but public safety is a wider.
It's a wide catch-all.
Yeah, it takes in everything. And then there's the intersectionality of public safety that comes with everything else that goes on in the community. Because when you become powerful around public safety, then you have the potential to become powerful around education, housing, social services, juvenile services.
Yes.
See what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so it's all in the framing, how you frame it.
That's exactly right. See, that's what we need to be talking about. We don't need to be, in some ways, they applaud us when we're talking in this limiting conversation and limiting our power and outreach as it relates to the issues that impact our community. No, we ought to be out front and in charge of those things. We ought to be directing the horse, not somehow not sitting behind and being pulled in a chariot. We need to be more aggressive about that process. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about community control of the police and other things that go along with it. There has to be a broader involvement in government and the agencies that government has as it relates. I don't have to tell you, our communities are starving for social services. Our communities are starving for services related to youth and the other things that somehow never manifest themselves in our community in the kind of way that create the environment and the problems that we're having in our community. And the only way we're going to address that is that we have to somehow never come into a realization about the real power that we have and then use it.
Wow. Okay. This was good. This was good. So we've reached our 10:30 mark. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back in segment 2, Ron, I want you to walk us through the first things we should do as a community to take hold and control of what's happening from a public safety perspective in our communities? What are the first steps? What do we need to do? Who do we need to call to the table? How do we get started? Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right. Let's Justice Big Listening Audience, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in 3 minutes. All right. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. So now we're going to sit back and take instructions and lessons in this segment, because I want to make sure we leave our listening audience with next steps. We have about 12 minutes in this segment before we do Q&A at 10:45. So Ron, talk to us. How do we get started? Especially with you mentioning, I believe I understood you to say that the National Black Police Association had their first organizing efforts here in St. Louis. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. So we're all ears. How do we get started? Yeah. Who need to be at the table?
Yeah. Let me do the St. Louis was a site where all of these organizations came together, or local organizations came together, and they was there for several days. And out of that coming together in them several days, the creation of the National Black Police Association, which was an umbrella, and is an umbrella for local organizations. There's a local Black Police Association in St. Louis called the Ethical Society. There's a sister who's the head of it.
You talking about Heather Taylor?
Yeah, she's a member of the National. That organization was one of the founding members of the National Black Police Association. And look, you all had some local leaders there. And then not only that, the lady who is the district attorney for the county that St. Louis is in, I mean, these are some dynamite young women who are doing some fantastic work around criminal justice.
Yeah, I had our circuit attorney on the show back in April.
Yeah,
Heather just retired.
Oh, is that right?
She just retired in the last 2 weeks.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, I've been paying attention to her. In 2010, I stepped down as the executive director of the organization. I had been serving as the executive director since around 1987, 1986. And believe me, the organization and the people in St. Louis, one guy I got to call his name, Rodney Williams, who is a retired St. Louis police officer, but one of the mainstays and best guys in terms of the organization and doing the kind of work, and a long-term member of the Ethical Society. So that's the kind of those are the kind of components that you want to have in your local neighborhood and community when it comes to these kind of issues. But let me go right to it and tell you that when the community, the first steps is number one, the community need to come together and talk about what the issues are.
Okay.
Because and this may sound strange because we find ourselves talking about them all the time. Need to talk about them in the sense of documenting them so that when after you've gone through step 3 and 4, then you can be able to go back and evaluate to what effect you've had on those issues after you have clearly articulated them. After you come together, talk about these issues, you will probably need to bring somebody in who is well-versed in this kind of stuff, but is independent from the organization, but have a vested interest in completing the process, but separate from, independent from the people there. And then go through the whole process of educating themselves about how to take back and utilize their power as it relates to what the issues are. You also had to do some analysis. You know, we don't do sometimes, and even in modern policing, we don't use the data. There's an abundance of data in St. Louis. And let me digress for 1 second. There's such a thing as calls for service, how the community calls the police department. One of the things that I would do if they call me to St. Louis and I'm sitting in the community talking about how to do this, I would first of all want to know what the call data says about how the people in St. Louis call the police. Not only how they call the police, but what do they call the police for? And I'm willing to bet you, and I haven't seen the data, but I'm willing to bet you that 75, 80% of the times that people, our community, call the police if we would stop and think about that, after we've done some resource analysis in our own community, we wouldn't even have to call the police. We can substantially reduce the footprint of the police department in our community by looking at the call data and doing resource assessment in terms of what we have in our community, and then also utilizing other organizations, profit as well as non-governmental as well as governmental agencies to address some of the systemic problems in our country, in our community, because some of our problems are related to the lack of resources or even the wrong distribution of resources as relate to what the issues are. For example, when I was growing up, rec centers used to stay open to 9, 10 o'clock at night. Schools stayed open equally to 9, 10 o'clock at night, because that's where we played basketballs in the school, in the local basketball league. Schools now close when people leave, when the students leave school at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and people go home. So what we want to also find out is who lives in our community and what do they do. Why should I call the police about an issue if I got a social worker down the street from me who has case management experience as well as resources in terms of helping families in the community who need help, mental health people, the whole 9 yards. So that's the kind of thing. So first we need to do, call people together. Then we need to have a discussion about and access the data about what it is that they call the police for. Then we had to do a resource assessment to identify what are the real resources in our community, who does what do they do? And then we need to talk to our community people who have those skills and resources and how to apply those resources so we can reduce the footprint of the police.
In our communities.
Yeah, in our community. We don't want them.
Ooh, that makes sense.
And I'm telling you, it is. I want to say that it is almost as easy as you can talk about it. But the fact of the matter is that you have to bring people together, have that discussion, and show them what it is that they need to be doing. And I'm not showing it to them. The data is going to show it to them. The behavior is going to show it to them. The people's willingness to step up is going to show it to them. All the evidence that they need is right there in the community as it relates to what they're going to do. And then the other thing that we had to do sometime is that we had to celebrate our accomplishments. Don't take for granted that people are doing this and they don't need to be celebrated. We need to celebrate and raise up the people who are doing this work. And I'm talking about in the community and the community itself. And then we need to have folk who are also paying attention to and documenting our success as it relates to what it is that we're doing, so we can have a record of it and do it. Now, again, people in the community should be saying, Ron, is there some place where this is happening? Of course it is. There's nothing new. There's nothing new in our society today. And then the other question is, what kind of success have they had with it? And how is it going? And there are communities that we can go to. I'm talking about Black communities that we can go to and look at their communities right here in North Carolina that have been doing some of this, and they're calling it reducing the footprint of law enforcement in our community. And they have gone through the same process that I've articulated here, and they're having success in doing it. Are there bumps? Of course they are. In reducing the footprint on the community, it's empowering the community because of the community's action and behavior around it, but it's also reducing that conversation, that back voice of the police department that when we call them, they say they can't come because they're too busy. No, you're not too busy. See, now you're not doing it, and then we don't want you in our community doing stops, projection, traffic stops, when all those things, all they're doing is alienating our community. Then the community becomes disgruntled and displacing about even participating in government, because the police are the most visible face and form of government in terms of contact and confrontation with citizens. So if we reduce that, it's going to have a short-term and long-term effect on what it is that people are going to do across the board. And I'm willing to bet you, and I've seen it, that if they get active in the public safety components in our community, then that activism spreads to education. Because see, at the root of some of the things that's going on in our community is the education system. which is even more segregated and more racist now than it ever has been. And I'm just speaking from my experiences. Housing, we begin to look at the housing issues in our community. You know, there's still redlining in our community. There's still issues about the cost of living as it relates to housing in our community. The rents and the attempt to buy houses is just astronomical. But we have programs in our community, sometimes through government, but our community is not aware of those programs to help them buy houses and buy some of the same houses that exist in those communities. When it comes to the other things that are going on, it's just amazing what happens once you get to the place where people are woke,
right?
What it is they need to do and what they had the power to do, and then they can get it done. Now, having said all that, and I don't want to give anybody any work, but that's the kind of work it's going to take.
Yeah.
Get it done. And then you got to be on top of it all the time, because see, they're going to be those people. You might even have some in the community, but you're going to definitely have people, some in government, who are going to say, well, you know, they're going to be challenging whether or not what you're doing is what you ought to be doing.
Okay.
What you ought to be doing. Now, the other part that community folks should ask, they want to know, is this an attempt to replace the police? No, it's not an attempt to replace the police.
Oh, thank you so much, because I was going to ask you to talk about this whole mess around defunding the police. Well, and really coming up with a real working definition of what defunding really means and what it looks like.
Okay. You know, I can't, I'm gonna say this in the interest of full disclosure. I don't know what Black Lives Matter meant by when they did it, but what they did though was very effective, because they got everybody talking about it.
Exactly.
And that they needed to do that. There needed to be a conversation about what the police do. And this is clearly an effort. And the police have brought this on themselves. This ain't something that Black Lives Matter heaped on the police. This is something that the police have heaped on our society, period. Yeah, so they're responsible for it. But I can tell you, for me, and the people that I work with, defund the police means that we're looking at what it is that the police do through the money that they get in their budget, and whether or not it's effective, or can it be done by somebody else or someplace else. Now, that makes sense. Because see, it don't make sense for me to continue to do something that you don't do well and you don't have good results. It's almost like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And I can't even remember what the end of it said, but
the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting and it getting the same results. So I mean, we got to change stuff up. So if I may add, when you talked about the data,
right?
See, if we get a hold of the data and the utilization rate data,
right,
of how the police resources are distributed, that would be justification
for
the reallocation of resources, which
thank you
defunding.
And then too, we need to, people in the community have their anecdotal evidence in the community, because when I was on the police department, and I remember we used to talk about, they were talking about performance, and I would talk about performance in reference to what I saw and what I didn't see. They would somehow or another measure police performance by how, when a call came in, the need for the police, they measured the performance by how quickly the police got to the call. Well, that might have been all right then, but that didn't last long, because see, it isn't rather how quickly you can get to the house. It's what you do after you get to the house that counts.
Right.
See, so then they started to change, because the dynamics changed. They realized that you could, in a district like the district I worked in, you could go from one end of the district to the other end of the district in maybe 3 to 5 minutes by car, with lights and sirens on, okay? But what did you do when you got to the house? See, that's the real question.
Right.
You eliminate the situation that the person who called you, or did you add to it?
Exactly.
Exacerbate the situation once you got there. Did you expand on the problem rather than reduce the problem? And so now the people are looking at those kind of issues and have been for some time, but it even goes even further now. And I know you've heard this because somebody in St. Louis in the leadership of the police department probably said that. They probably said that after all these 30 or so years I've been in law enforcement, some of the things that the public asked us to do, we had no business doing.
Mm-hmm.
They have said that.
Right.
They continue to say it because as the leader of the police department, you're in a position to see the 30,000 foot view versus the 5,000 foot
mm-hmm.
or the 100 foot view.
Right.
And when you do that, you also get to look at whether or not was the strategy that you use effective.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I happen to believe, and I think the data would agree with me, that police department they should never ever respond to issues related to people with mental illness. And I don't care how much training you give them,
right?
Not their job, because the training that they do is very different than the training that one needs and spends an awful lot of time in order to be able to handle people with issues with mental health.
Exactly.
I have a
we did
son.
a show on that last week, last Saturday, on disabilities and law enforcement.
That's right. Yeah, I saw that. I didn't see the piece, but I saw the promo part about it. And I have a son who's 36 and he's a person with autism. And we don't want the police to deal with him. We don't want the police to deal with him. And there are other people with other disabilities that the police have no. We want people who are professionally trained individuals to be able to handle that. And some police departments who have realized that through their leadership and other things, and looking at the data, that is not a job that they've been good at. And so why continue to do it if that's not what it is that you do?
Oh, I love numbers. So we're going to figure out a way to kick this together, because I know that look, the devil is in the details of the numbers.
All the time.
Okay, all the time.
All the
and
time.
When you talk about mystifying stuff, that's been mystified.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I don't think the police ought to respond to domestic violence issues.
Right.
Yeah, they're not equipped to handle that. And I don't care, again, I don't care how much training you expose them to, that is not what it is that they need to be doing. And there are other things that they get to respond to that they have no. I'm even questioning whether police should even be involved in issues involving youth, because the police, and especially when we talk about Black youth, when we talk about Black youth, they don't have a good record or a good history in terms of dealing with those issues. And that's all the stuff that you had to lay on that table. And then, Elaine, there's so much research out there, so many practices that looked at those issues. We cannot disregard the research. And what we ought to be doing ought to be using their terms. They're the one that came up, the white folk were the ones who came up with this term about evidence-based shit.
Yeah, evidence-based practices,
That's exactly it. So let's look at the evidence and stop the practice.
Right.
Because it's detrimental, and the long-term, short-term impact of it is more detrimental than any other thing that they're doing or they think that they're going to get from it.
And we got to have the right folks looking at the evidence, the data, because certain data can be interpreted and skewed to mean stuff different. So you got to have the folks who have the investment and interest of the community at heart looking at that data. We are about 10 minutes over our queue. We need to go to Q&A. We said at 10:45 we was going to take questions. And see, we could have did this show for about 2 hours, man. I'm telling you, Ron. All right, Melissa, do we have any questions coming in?
Hey, good morning. Hi, Mr. Hampton.
Good morning.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. We've just got some comments that I think are worthy of looking at. So from Tyrone says, it has to be a collective effort. It can't just be a few people. It must be all, at least one per household. So the question is, how do we build this collective effort where you have enough people buying in?
Well, once you decide that you're going to bring people together, you you bring everybody together. You put the call out for everybody to come to the meeting because you want everybody there. You want young people, you want senior citizens, you want people who go to work every day, you want people who stay home. You want everybody there. Everybody who lives in that community need to be at that meeting. And they need to be involved and in the conversation. And that first meeting, the intent is to fill out what it is the community is doing and to document what it is that they're talking about, so then you can come back, because you want to be able to address those issues. Maybe you may not be able to address every single issue, but you want to get a sense of what are the issues that this community has and the priority of those issues as it relates to that community. I don't want one person from a household. I want everybody from the household, because one person cannot speak to all of the situations. If you got a household where you got a mother and a father, and you got 4 children, and you got a grandma, all of them need to come to the meeting, because all of them issues are very different. Okay.
I love it. I love it. Okay, we've got from Tony. Just his comment was, if we call the police, they make things worse or they kill someone. That is not protecting or serving. And I think you already touched on this, but more thoughts on that?
Well, that's true. And so those catchy phrases that we put on police cars these days, and for some time now, I remember when LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, started doing that. There's one on the Washington, D.C. police cars about when you call us, we something. I can't, because, and the reason why I can't remember half of them is because that I'm not paying attention to the phrase as much as I'm paying attention to the behavior of the individual who's riding in the car with the phrase on it. Because if he's not or she's not carrying out, if their behavior isn't consistent with the phrase, then the and so that's why I said what we had to do is get down to, I wouldn't have a problem with nothing being on the car. And as long as when they got there, they did something. And what they did addressed the issue that existed at the time that they got there. So it don't have to be a phrase. I don't have to be reminded about the protect and serve. What I need to do is see how you're going to behave and handle my situation, and without bias or prejudice too.
Absolutely, yes. I've got, let's see, just one more from Patrice. She just said, she was just making suggestions about things that we can do. And so she was saying low housing communities, get them gated, more trade classes through public schools and high schools, give parents better resources to educate. The more we do these things, the less our crime rates will be. So thoughts on that?
Well, I think that there's some things that we had to do. Now, for example, there's this national movement about police officers in schools. And I've been for some time opposed to having police in school. I think we need to have police in school, and not because of the picture of police in school, but what it is that we do to students. There's some schools that I work in on occasionally. My job is to go into school, work with the students and the families around truancy issues. And the fact of the matter is that if I get there at 8 o'clock in the morning and school starts at 9 or 8:45, there's 100 students standing in the vestibule, and they're being searched, going through x-ray machines, and their stuff going through x-ray machines. That looked like somebody trying to get into prison to me.
Yes.
In short, if we treat them like prisoners, that's how they're going to act. So I don't think we ought to do that. And it certainly doesn't make the school safer. And I'm saying that from a data standpoint. School is still the safest place for our students from 8 to 4, all across the country. And so we need to be paying attention to those kind of things, and not necessarily be allowing one incident, say in our community, to drive us to do something that's going to have short-term, long-term effect on what our students, how they're behaving, what they think about the institutions in our society. So we have to give some thought to it, and not simply play to the fear and other things that happen to us that drive us to do it. To just stop and think sometimes. And And I think the universal answer to that is what we've been talking about in terms of the community being involved in that process.
Mhm.
Community has to get out of its fear of things, and the way you get out of fear is to be educated and look at the data, process the data, and to look at things from an analytical standpoint and not be twisted and turned just simply because something happened the other day.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So one final question, how do we get that data?
The data is free. All we got to do is ask the police department for the data. Look,
We can just get the data or do a sunshine request for the data if they want
that's
to.
exactly right. And look, and even if they tell you they can't give it to you, then you file a lawsuit and ask for under the Information of Freedom Act. That's
For you.
yeah,
That's what it's
for you.
called, for you,
That's
yeah.
what you do. But then we can hire people. We can hire people to do the data too. That's why I was saying so important, Elaine, that if we're going to do this, that one of the things that we had to stop and do once we get started is to have somebody work with us that's going to be involved in collecting the data, going through the data, but more importantly, reporting the data, and then we'll do some going back over looking at it, because we have to have, they're going to say to us, how do we know this is working?
Okay, so Ron.
We know you're not working.
So Ron, do I hear you saying you committing to come here on the ground, work with me and others? Come here and help us. I thought I heard you say that.
Let me say that. I don't have a problem with that, but when I come, I'm going to work. Now I'm gonna be there working. Now
I ain't scared to work.
Yeah, I ain't coming, and I'm coming to be messing around and talking crazy now.
Right.
I'm coming to work. Cause see, and then and because like I said, this can be done. This is
yes, it can.
Yeah, this is not no hope. This can be done, and people had to commit, and that's what I'm going to ask people to do. And I've done this here in our city, working with Tyrone Parker and them at the Alliance of Concerned Men. We do stuff out in Highland. They've been working in the city, formerly incarcerated individuals working in the city, doing gang truce and working with young people. Look, and I say to the community, we was up in Highland. Look, I told them, we had the same conversation. And I said, look, I want you to commit to me that you're going to be there, because I'm going to be there. Every time you say we're going to meet, I'm going to be there. I want you to be there, and I have expectations.
Right.
Expectation is that every time I show up, you're going to show up, and when I talk, you're going to talk.
Right.
And I'm going to expect any more from you than I'm going to expect from myself.
All right, Ron. Okay, this is a done deal, and I want to say to the listening audience, those who are sending in questions, commenting, listening on Real STL News page, on our show page on Facebook. Listen, we need more than commenting, more than critiquing.
Right.
When we make this clarion call about getting involved at the table, I want to see the folks who are online commenting, who are sending in questions, who have been supporting our show tremendously, especially on Real STL News page. We need y'all at the table. See, seriously, there are a lot of talk shows on. They talk and they make everything, they just do a whole bunch of jip jap.
No,
we're bringing you the information, and then we're taking next steps. Okay.
And I'm not afraid of those people who disagree.
That's right.
Just bring your facts. Bring your facts with you. Now don't come in there talking, and you ain't got no facts. Or you ain't got the data. Because see, I'm gonna have the data. And we're gonna go about getting the data from the police department, because see, it's there. We get the data from the police department about calls for service. And we want to know, what are the calls for service? We're not going to just ask the community. We want to know what the call, and the calls for service data also talk about what was the conclusion. Did they do what it is that they needed to do? Get that data. And then we can look at other data from other places that are equal and similar to what it is that's going on in St. Louis. Because St. Louis is not in a silo.
Come on.
No, it's not in a silo.
No.
Yeah, so there are similar situations.
Yes.
There ain't nothing new. So I'm not bringing nothing new, and I'm not professing that I'm some God's figure. I'm just saying that there are other places where we have worked, and you had to be committed to doing the work and then getting it done. And the results are based.
I've got one more question, Mr. Hampton.
One more
I have time
question?
for one more.
That's me.
Yeah, go ahead and do one more question.
Okay, this is from Carla, and she says, should there be departments within the police departments that specialize in mental illness and domestic violence calls?
Well, that may be one way of doing it. What I'm talking about are the individuals that are actually doing it. I believe they ought to be professionals who work in the domestic violence field and the mental health field all of the time. See,
And I'm sorry.
somebody who works with mental health went to school for 8 years probably.
Mhm.
And police didn't go to school. They're being trained externally to be able to handle it. But somebody who went to school for 8 years to handle mental health is by far different. So there are two ways of handling. You can have a body of civilians who are professionals in the police department to handle it, or you can have the Department of Behavioral Health, which is a city agency, handle it and work with the police to handle it, because the police don't need to go to that call. And that can be discerned at the level that the call is taking place. Because most police departments, most cities have communication centers. The call goes into the communication center, then the call can be discerned out to a mental health professional rather than the police department. Now, the police department can be aware of the call, but it's not going to respond to the call.
Mhm.
There's a brother in St. Petersburg, Florida. He's the chief of police. He has just, on October the 1st, he has just hired some mental health professionals, civilian professionals, to handle some calls that the police department is going to get. And they're not going to the calls in police calls. They go into the calls in regular calls to handle something. So what they're doing is downloading from the police department those calls that other agencies and individuals, civilians, can handle, so the police don't handle. Because the police, what he's obviously looked at is their effective rate as it relates to those calls for service.
Mhm.
And I'm not the only one who are raising these issues and have offered some alternatives as it relates to how should we respond to them.
Mhm.
We're just not doing the job. Policing is just not doing the job. So it can be either way. It can be in the department, but run by and consist of civilians, or it can be a civilian organization within government agencies that respond to it. And there are, the Department of Behavioral Health has what they call crisis units, and
Right.
respond to those kind of situations. So this ain't nothing new.
Mhm.
When I was a police officer in the 80s, they actually had a section in our police department where police officers worked with psychologists and social workers responding to calls of shooting and problems in the community. Because there was a time somebody got shot, they just laid them out and left them laying out in the street. But that unit brought some civility to the whole process by when the body was laying out in the street, then they start covering up the body.
Mhm.
Children standing around looking at a dead body with blood coming out of, become desensitized
Exactly.
to not only to that as well as other things too in our community. So, again, but they didn't have the patience and the aptitude to stick with it, because when budgets got tight, that was one of the first things that they got rid of and not doing. Although we were being successful with what it was that it was doing, it did not have the longevity. Officers working with psychologists and social workers around responding to calls of violence in our community. It was a pilot project. And I knew the brother that I had. As a matter of fact, I went to school with the brother. He wasn't a police officer, he was a civilian, but the chief of police at that time had the vision of creating this with his name was, the guy that I went to school with, his name was Thomas Blackburn. But the police chief we had the vision to allow Thomas Blackburn to articulate this proposal and then actually do it and then man the components that was needed in order for it to be successful. And they had success. They had success with it, but we don't do it no more. We don't do it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Melissa, do we have any other questions? No?
I think that's it for today.
Okay. Thank you so much. Ron, we still.
Thank you, Melissa.
Okay. So, all right, wow, Ron, okay. You and I are gonna have to talk more offline, like later in the week, so we can keep the ball rolling here.
Okay.
Because it's what I'm finding is that people are very eager to air their grievances and their complaints, but there seems to be a void around coming together and coming up with solutions. And and some of it we talked about earlier around apathy. Also, we've seen so much disappointment around things not being done and changed that people just kind of throw their hands up and figure, okay, I just can't wait to get out of here. That's basically what happens. And so you leave a desecrated community that no one wants to invest in. And you probably, if you were here in the 70s and 80s or however many years ago, some of those same dilapidated buildings in the city of St. Louis are still there. Are still there. I had been gone 35 years, came back 4 years ago, left here at 18, and was really, really just shocked. I had been back home, for family gatherings and stuff like that.
Right.
But had never worked in this city, okay? Left right at 18, going off to school, and been gone 35 years, and to see the same destruction in a city it is mind-boggling. It is as if there is a dark cloud over the city. And I'm sure there are other cities that way, as you mentioned before, where it seems like nothing changes.
Right.
You wear the people down so much to where they just even lose any interest.
That's true.
And trying to build the community.
Yeah. Well, during the time that I was involved in the organization, we had several conferences there. We stayed at the hotel, the Sheraton downtown, that in front of the ballpark, and we used the High Regency, the one that's in the train station.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Like that. Right. That. So over the years, the organization's relationship with St. Louis and the Ethical Society has been strong, but also had a chance to see changes and not so many changes in the community, because we also got a chance to expand our visit beyond just downtown. And then that's when you really get a chance to see what hasn't happened versus what has happened.
Exactly.
But right, and one thing, it has happened in other cities too. So St. Louis is a known city. That gentrification is taking place.
Oh, you took the word out my mouth. I was sitting here waiting to say, we didn't even talk about gentrification, Ron.
Gentrification that's happened here in Washington, D.C. And believe me, there's been some side effects, and I'm serious side effects of gentrification for Black folk that have been just crazy. It has been crazy.
Yes.
And some of these city leaders don't care.
They don't care.
They want to see the success and the economic impact of gentrification rather than what the side effects of gentrification is for Black people, for Hispanic people who have lived through the ups and downs and the bad times and almost now can't even afford to live in the same, I don't want to cuss, the same city that you lived in and grew up in. You can't, here in Washington, D.C., if I hadn't brought my house a long time ago, I wouldn't have been able to buy a house in this city. It's good God.
Ron, inside of D.C. now, oh my God, those row houses that were going for I was there I did 2 stints in D.C. So the last time I was there was 1999 to 2005 or 6. You could have easily bought a nice row house in DC area for somewhere around $70,000-$80,000.
That's right.
They're going for $1 million now.
That's right, my sister.
I said you have got to be broken. I almost kicked myself for not buying one back then. They're going for over $1 million.
Look, I live in Petworth. When I bought my house in '81, I paid $70,000 for. Let me tell you what. If I sold it today, I could get a lot of money for it.
I'm telling you.
Look, but even if I sold it, I'd have to put some money to it in order to get another house.
Exactly.
It's unbelievable.
Yes.
How's it going? So no, and I believe me, I ain't selling it. I'm gonna be the last Negro in Washington. I'm not no place. But so I ain't selling, and they be asking, sending postcards and calling you on the telephone, asking you about selling your house.
Right.
So
Right.
It's just unbelievable. But
So we got to connect them dots though on gentrification and public safety.
oh no, they're
Because
connected.
also-
There's no question. Oh,
It's a whole
look,
nother
look.
piece around that.
Hey, let me tell you this. We were talking about this the other day. The gentrifiers live in the neighborhood. They see brothers who've been standing on the corner talking as a problem because see, that wasn't something that they saw in the communities that they came from in our outback hour. They didn't see
Very communal.
So, and look, so then they call the police, and what they tell the dispatcher is there's some African-American men standing on the corner at 14th and Irving Street. Can you send a car? Well, what we've been talking about is that the dispatcher as well as the police ought to talk to the gentrifier and educate them about that people standing on the corner is not a crime
right
in DC.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to criminalize people just simply because it's unfamiliar to you.
Exactly.
That's because that's exactly at the end of the day what we're talking about. Because that's something that you are not familiar with, don't mean that it's criminal.
Right.
Maybe what you need to do is go out there and talk to the Black people standing on the corner and find out what's going on.
And see, Ron, one of the things I think we made a mistake as a community by adopting and or assimilating in a way that we have taken away the basic tenets of how we communicate, and we are very communal people. You have people that sat on their front porch waving, hey, how you doing? Folks come out to the corner to greet somebody, they standing around talking. The community was community, but we got into these places where, because we living in the suburbs, we living around folks who, a lot of white folks, we started adopting their ways of going behind the doors, shutting the doors, locking the doors, closing the blinds, and not saying nothing to nobody. So that is how we have also become, in this quagmire, because, if they understood what our real community was like, the police wouldn't be criminalizing it.
That's exactly right. Yeah, because the police and the gentrifiers, well, they criminalize certain behavior, and some of it is ignorance. But the way you can eliminate the ignorance is that you need to educate yourself and talk to the very people who live in your community.
That's right.
We got all of these gentrifiers that live in our community, and I think it's about one family who is have come in and speak to people and act like their neighbors. The rest of them, they act like they live in a world all of their own.
Come on.
And I'm in a position, and I'm of the position that if they want to live in a world all of their own, they're welcome to it.
Right.
But this community belongs to me because I've been here. I'm not a Johnny come lately.
Right.
Certain things that I think we have to maintain as a result, as it relates to the culture,
right,
and backdrop of our communities. But you're absolutely right.
So we're gonna on that note, we're going to wrap things up here. We've gone over, but it's been good. This has been, that's why I said we have to keep coming back, and even probably doing follow-up shows as we begin to pull the community together so people can watch alongside us and see what's happening and keeping them informed. So is there anything that you'd like to leave as a takeaway moment, or any encouraging words to our viewership before we wrap up?
Well, I think one of the things that we can do, Elaine, is that in the COVID times that we're living in town, that shouldn't be an excuse to us getting together and talking about this. There's some things that we've done over Zoom that in terms of bringing folk together. So if you and others want to bring folk together, I'm willing to attend and participate.
Okay. Talk
to them, raise some of the questions. It needs to be where we can have a dialogue back and forth. And then when it's safe for me to come there, when it's safe for people to get in person and talk about the strategy and start to working on the steps that are necessary in order to get it done, then people will be familiar with it. But from the onset, I'm gonna ask from a commitment, from people a commitment, because I don't have a lot of time to waste.
Right.
And I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about. I'm not being arrogant. I'm just saying at this stage of my life, if I'm going to invest in something, I want it to be that it's going to have some results and it's going to have long-term effect.
Exactly.
You want people to be dedicated to that process, because I'm dedicated to doing it.
Right. Okay. Understood. And if we, as the show, have to try to be the driver behind this, then I'm willing to do that, so that we have a forum and a platform where we can consistently drive this forward. Okay.
All right. Sounds good to me. Thank you very much. Good to see you too.
I know, Ron. I know you was always dear to me, man. I'm telling you. And you know, just your taking me under your wings like almost a little sister when I was there, and introducing me to everybody around the country around disability issues. And every time y'all had something going, you had me out front. And so I appreciate you for that. And I thank you. Thank you. Take care of yourself. I'm going to be in touch. Okay. Now.
Okay, then. I look forward to it. And thank Melissa too.
Yeah, I will. And Justice Beat listening audience, thank you so much. We know we went over significantly with this particular show, but it was needed. The information was needed, and we thank you for joining us. We'll see you back on next Saturday at 10 a.m. via Facebook Live and Real STL News Facebook Live. Thank you. Take care and God bless.
All right. Take care then.
Thank you for listening to the Justice Beat. If you like what you heard and found the information useful, then support the Justice Beat radio show by spreading the word and telling a friend.